The year was 1879, a full 14 years after the guns of the Civil War had fallen silent. But out here in Red Mesa County, the war was with the sky. The sun was not a giver of life. It was a brass eye, wide and hateful, burning the high grasses brown, then yellow, then to a pale, brittle straw. The ground cracked. The red dust, fine as flour, rose in the slightest breeze and coated everything. It caked the mouths of cattle. It settled in the lungs of men. It was the color of old blood. This was a hard land in a hard time, and the drought was a fist closing slow. Cole Archer knew the fist. He felt its pressure every morning when he swung his legs out of the bed that was too large for one man. He lived with ghosts, the ghosts of his wife, Martha, and their son, Thomas, taken not by the drought itself, but by the fever that had ridden in on its dusty coattails 3 years prior. Their small graves sat on the rise behind the ranch house, marked by simple wooden crosses he had carved himself. The silence they left behind was louder than any gunshot. Cole was a widower, a man defined by what he had lost. Now, he feared losing the only thing left. He stood at the edge of his only reliable water source, the bitter spring. It was the lifeblood of his ranch. The spring was not a spring anymore. It was a shallow, muddy pool, its edges crusted with white alkali. The water level had dropped 3 feet in 2 months. His cattle, bony and slow, huddled nearby, too weak to search for the non-existent grass. He had 100 head left. If the bitter spring went dry, they would die. And if the herd died, the ranch died. His last connection to Martha, the home they had built, would turn to dust and blow away. His one goal was simple, brutal, an absolute hold the herd in the spring through the dry. He saddled his horse, the leather stiff and hot. The ride to San Diablo was 5 miles of simmering heat. The town itself was a scar on the landscape. 2 rows of sun-bleached wooden buildings staring each other down across a street of ankle-deep dust. The air smelled of hot pine, stale whiskey, and the faint, sharp tang of the tannery. It was a place of quiet desperation. The only building that seemed to repel the dust was the San Diablo Bank. It was painted white, and its windows were clean. On its shaded boardwalk sat Bartholomew Quinn, the bank's owner. Quinn was a man from back east, soft-handed and always dressed in a black wool suit, defiant of the heat. He watched Cole ride by, his eyes cold. Quinn was the true power in Red Mesa. He held the paper on half the ranches in the county. He was buying up water rights, damming the small creeks, and choking the life from the land for a profit Cole could not fathom. Quinn was the antagonist, the polite, smiling face of the county's slow starvation. Cole tied his horse outside the thirsty spur. The saloon run by Maggie Doyle. The name was a piece of grim frontier humor. Inside, it was dark and smelled of sweat, sour beer, and sawdust. Maggie was behind the massive oak bar, a woman of indeterminate age with steady hands and eyes that missed nothing. She ran her establishment with a firm grip, and the half-dozen orphan girls she had taken in over the years, who helped her serve and clean, were under her fierce protection. She saw Cole and nodded, her expression grim. Business was bad when men could not afford to drink away their troubles. At a small table in the corner sat Deputy Ezra Pike. Ezra was a young man, barely 25, and he still believed in the letter of the law. He believed in warrants and judges. His badge was bright, but his face was worn with frustration. He was a decent man in a place where decency was a luxury. Cole, his throat raw with dust, ordered a beer he could not afford. He overheard the whispers from 2 ranch hands at the next table. The name spoken was Caleb Voss. Voss was a man with a dark reputation, a former cavalry officer who had been discharged for brutality during the Indian Wars. Now he led a band of rough men known as the Red Rock Outfit. They wore old cavalry dusters and carried repeating rifles. They worked for Bartholomew Quinn. The whispers said Voss and his men were the ones enforcing Quinn's new water taxes, the ones dynamiting old springs to redirect the flow to Quinn's new dam. They were the muscle behind the legal theft. Ezra Pike looked up and saw Cole listening. The deputy sighed, pushing his cold coffee away. "I know what you are hearing." "Cole," he said, his voice low, "but I cannot arrest a rumor. And Mr. Quinn swears they are just guards for his property." "Property," Cole said, his own voice rough. "He is guarding water that belongs to everyone." Ezra just shook his head, looking down at his empty cup. The law was not on the side of the thirsty. Cole finished his beer, the bitter taste matching his mood. He had one last chance, a cattle drive. If he could get his remaining herd to Santa Fe, he could sell them, pay off his note with Quinn, and buy hay to last the winter. But he could not do it alone. He needed a crew, and most importantly, he needed a cook. A good cook kept a crew from quitting. A bad one could break it. He walked to the general store and pulled a piece of paper and a pencil from his pocket. He wrote slowly, pushing the pencil hard. "Wanted. Cook for cattle drive. Long haul. Must be clean. Must know how to provision. Pay on return." He tacked the notice to the community board, a piece of wood covered in old requests for lost horses and notices of land auctions. He felt a familiar despair. Who would take such a job, in this heat, for a ranch that was clearly failing? He turned to leave, and she was there. She had moved from the thin slice of shade beside the store. She was a native woman, but not from the local tribes. She was tall for a woman, slender but with a solidness to her stance. She wore worn denim trousers, a man's shirt, and scuffed boots. Her black hair was tied back in a simple knot. She was Lipan Apache, with a trace of Mexican blood in the line of her jaw and the shape of her eyes, and she was watching him. Her name was Aiyana Greyhawk. She was known as Anna to the few she trusted. She was a warrior, a scout, who had seen her people scattered and her family lost. She carried her past in the rigid set of her shoulders and in the long, pale scar that ran from her left temple, across the cheekbone, to the corner of her mouth. It was an old knife wound, and it gave her face a permanent, taut expression. She was in Red Mesa for her own reasons. She was hunting. She was following the trail of stolen people, of young native women taken from the reservations and sold to mining camps north. That dark trail, she had learned, was deeply connected to the men who were also stealing the water. The Red Rock outfit, Caleb Voss. She had been in San Diablo for 3 days, watching, listening, invisible. She had seen Cole Archer. She knew he was desperate. She knew his ranch, the Broken Spur, bordered the land where Quinn was building his largest dam. She had seen the notice go up. It was an opportunity, a way inside, a cover. She stepped in front of Cole, blocking his path. Her stillness was absolute. "You are looking for a cook," she said. It was not a question. Her voice was low and held a faint, smoky texture. Cole stopped. He looked at her. He saw the scar. He saw her race. He saw a woman who looked more like a fighter than a cook. The street was quiet. He could feel the eyes of the town on his back. A white rancher, hiring an Apache woman. He felt a flash of irritation. "I need a cook," he said, "not a hand." "I can cook," she replied, her gaze unwavering. "I can feed a crew, and I know how to make a little water go a long way." That last sentence struck him. Save water. It was the only thing that mattered. He looked at her again. Really looked. She was thin, but she was not weak. There was an intelligence in her eyes, a sharp, assessing quality that made him uneasy. But he was out of time. His crew was 2 men, and they were threatening to leave. The drive had to start in 3 days. He was a drowning man. He did not care what the driftwood looked like. "You know how to handle a chuck wagon?" he asked. "I can learn what I do not know." He rubbed the back of his neck, the skin gritty with sweat and dust. This was a mistake. He knew it, but it was the only mistake available to him. "Be at my wagon. It is by the livery. 1 hour," he said. Aiyana Greyhawk nodded once. She did not smile. She did not look relieved. She simply turned and walked toward the livery, her steps economical and sure. Cole watched her go. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had just hired a stranger, a native woman with a warrior's scar, to feed his men on a desperate journey. From her window, Maggie Doyle watched the exchange. She frowned, wiping her hands on her apron. She had seen that woman in town, watching everyone, speaking to no one. She felt a prickle of unease. On the edge of town, near the dry riverbed, the old Navajo man, Red Sand, sat on his gray pony. He had watched the white man post his notice. He had watched the Apache woman answer it. He knew her people. They were fighters. He knew the white man. He was broken, but not yet dead. Red Sand pulled his blanket tighter, though the heat was a physical weight. He began to chant, a low, quiet song for water. The water was angry. It was being held against its will. He knew where the deep, secret springs slept, the springs the white men knew nothing about. He knew the land was preparing for a fight. The hiring was done. The spark had been struck. In the oppressive, dusty heat of Red Mesa County, the first small stone had been kicked, and it was about to start an avalanche. Ayanna walked to the wagon. It was an old, sturdy freight wagon, its canvas cover patched and its wheels iron-bound. Cole was already there, checking the harnesses on the 2 draft horses. He did not look at her. He just gestured with his chin toward the back. "Get your things stowed," he said. "We leave now if we want to beat the worst of the heat." She said nothing. She had no things to stow beyond a small canvas roll that she tossed into the wagon bed. She climbed up to the wagon seat. Her movements were fluid, economical. Cole finished with the harnesses and pulled himself up beside her. He took the reins, slapped them lightly on the horses' backs, and the wagon groaned into motion. They left San Diablo behind, the town disappearing quickly into the shimmering haze. For the first hour, the only sound was the creak of the wagon, the plodding of the hooves, and the dry whistle of the wind through the dead grass. The sun was relentless, a white-hot coin in a pale sky. Cole kept his eyes on the horizon. The silence on the seat beside him was heavy, almost physical. He was used to being alone, but this woman's silence was different. It was not empty, it was watchful. He felt her presence like a weight. She is just a cook, he told himself, a desperate woman taking a desperate job. But he did not believe it. He glanced at her profile. The scar on her face was stark in the harsh light. Her eyes were not on the road. They scanned the ridges, the arroyos, the sky. She was reading the land, not just enduring it. The sky began to change around noon. The pale blue at the horizon thickened to a bruised yellow, then a deep, sickly brown. The wind, which had been a hot whisper, began to pick up, gusting and whining. Cole swore under his breath. He pulled his hat low. "A duster," he said, his voice tight. "A bad one." The world went dark. The sun vanished, blotted out by a solid wall of red dust that rose thousands of feet into the air. It hit them not as a wind, but as a physical impact. The air became a churning mass of grit and noise. The roar was deafening, like a constant, screaming animal. They could not see the horses in front of them. Cole fought the reins, trying to keep the team calm. The horses whinnied in terror, tossing their heads. The wagon was a small, fragile boat in a red ocean. Ayanna put her hand on his arm. Her grip was strong, steady. "Stop!" she shouted over the storm. "Stop or we break a wheel!" He hauled back, his knuckles white. The horses, sensing a firm hand, finally stopped, their bodies trembling, their backs to the wind. Cole pulled his neckerchief over his nose and mouth. The air was unbreathable. It was not air. It was dirt. It filled his eyes, his mouth, his lungs. "We wait it out," he yelled. Ayanna shook her head. Her black hair was loose, whipping across her face. "The wagon," she yelled back. "It will bury us." Before he could react, she was gone, climbing over the seat into the back. He heard a tearing sound. She reappeared, holding a length of rope and a piece of canvas she had ripped from a patch. She climbed down from the wagon, disappearing into the red gloom. "Woman, come back," he shouted. "It was useless." The wind tore the words from his mouth. He felt a terrible lurch. The wagon tilted violently to the left. He heard the sharp, sickening crack of heavy wood. The left rear axle. The wheel was gone. Swallowed by the storm. The wagon was crippled. One of the horses screamed, a sound of pure panic and pain. Cole grabbed his rifle from the scabbard by his feet. He jumped down, landing in sand that was already drifting past his ankles. He could barely stand. The wind tried to peel him from the ground. He stumbled toward the front, guided by the horse's terrible sound. The horse had broken its tether and, blind with fear, had tangled itself in the harness. Its front leg was caught, and the wagon's lurch had snapped the bone. He raised his rifle. It was the only merciful thing to do. A hand clamped down on the rifle barrel, pushing it toward the sky. Ayanna was there, her face a mask of red dust, her eyes burning. "No," she shouted. "The sound. It brings them—" "What?" he yelled back. "What brings them?" She pointed into the swirling red darkness, and he heard it. Beneath the howl of the wind, there was a new sound, a yipping, chattering chorus. Coyotes, or worse, the lobos, the big gray desert wolves. They had smelled the panic and the blood of the injured horse. Ayanna moved with a speed that shocked him. She pulled her own pistol from a holster he had not seen under her shirt. She did not aim at the sounds. She aimed at the rocks to their right. She fired once. The gunshot was flat, instantly devoured by the storm. But the muzzle flash was bright. She fired again, toward the left, a warning. She turned to the terrified horse. She spoke to it, her voice low and chanting, a sound in a language he did not know. The horse stopped screaming, its sides heaving. She took her knife. Not the bone one she kept hidden, but a simple skinning knife, and with 2 quick, expert cuts. She sliced the harness, freeing the animal. It stumbled, whimpering, but it stood. She grabbed the canvas she had brought. She tore it into strips. Cole watched, useless, as she quickly and efficiently bound the horse's broken leg, creating a rough but strong splint. "We cannot stay," she said, her voice calm in the chaos. "We move. Now." "How?" he yelled. "We are blind. The wagon is broken." She pointed up. He saw nothing but the red, churning sky. "The stars," she said. "I can see them." She was lying. It was impossible. But she grabbed the lead of the good horse, unhitching it. She tied the injured horse's lead to its saddle. She threw Cole the reins. "Lead him," she commanded, "and keep your rifle ready. Walk where I walk." She began to move, not against the wind, but angled to it. She moved with a strange, sure confidence, as if she were following a marked path. Cole, clutching his rifle and the reins, his eyes stinging shut, had no choice but to follow the shape in front of him. He did not know if they were walking in circles or walking toward a cliff. He only knew she was moving, and to stop meant to be buried alive. For what felt like hours, they walked. The storm howled. The wolves followed, their calls weaving in and out of the wind, always just beyond the curtain of dust. Ayanna never hesitated. Once. She stopped. She put her hand down, almost touching the ground. She turned her head, as if listening. Then she adjusted their course. 2 steps to the left. Cole felt a change. The ground was firmer. There was a smell under the dust. A damp, alkali smell. "Water," he breathed. Ayanna stopped. The storm was still raging, but she stood as if it were a calm afternoon. She pointed. "Your ranch," she said. He peered into the red. He saw a shape, a fence line. It was the south pasture. She had brought them 5 miles through a blind sandstorm, with a broken compass in her head, and found his ranch. She had navigated by stars he could not see, and by the faint, buried smell of the bitter spring. They stumbled through the gate. By the time they reached the main yard, the wind was already easing, the sky turning from red to a hazy, bruised purple. The storm was passing. He tied the horses to the hitching post. The injured horse leaned, its head low. Cole looked at the broken animal, then at the woman who had saved it. He started. She was not listening. She was staring at the main water trough, the one fed by the slow pipe from the spring. It was smashed. Great, heavy stones had been used to splinter the wood. The water line was broken, the precious water spilling out, forming a dark, expanding mud puddle in the yard. Cole ran to it. No, he fell to his knees, touching the splintered wood. This was not the storm. This was malice. He saw them then, boot prints, deep in the fresh mud. Not the worn, smooth soles of his ranch hands. These were new. They had a distinct, repeating pattern in the heel. Hobnails, the standard issue boot for a cavalryman. Voss, Cole whispered. Caleb Voss. Ayanna stood over the prints. Her face was impossible to read. She looked at the smashed trough, at the stolen water, and her eyes hardened. Not with anger, but with a cold, clear focus. Cole stood, his fists clenched. They were choking him. They were killing him, piece by piece. He turned to Ayanna. He needed to get the other horses under cover. "The storehouse," he said, his voice hoarse. "Put your roll in there. I will tend the horses." She nodded. She picked up her small canvas roll and walked to the storehouse, a small sod and wood building next to the main house. Cole watched her go, his mind reeling. Ayanna entered the cool, dark space. It smelled of canvas, old leather, and dried beans. She was alone. She walked to the far corner, behind a stack of empty barrels. She knelt in the shadows. She unrolled her bundle. Inside, among a few simple possessions, was a knife. It was not steel. It was made of a long, sharpened piece of bone, its handle wrapped in sinew. She tucked this weapon deep into a crack between the sod bricks, a hidden defense. Then, with the point of the knife, she reached under the lowest wooden stair of the small staircase that led to the loft. Out of sight, in the deep shadow, she scratched a symbol. It was a simple mark, a circle with a broken line. It was a sign for any of her people who might follow, a sign that meant, "I am here. The trail is hot, but there is danger." She went back outside. Cole was at the bitter spring, staring into its shallow, muddy heart. The pipe that fed the trough was just a trickle. "The dam," he said to himself. "Quinn's dam." He looked at Ayanna as she approached. He was a man cornered. "It is Kenquick," he said, his desperation making him speak his thoughts. "The dam on the tributary. It is cutting the feed. If we do not get rain, or that dam does not break." He kicked a rock. 10 days. In 10 days, my herd will be dead." Ayanna was not looking at the spring. Her eyes were fixed on the ground near the broken trough, on the mud where the attackers had stood. Cole saw only the boot prints. Ayanna saw something else. It was faint, almost erased, but she had been trained to see what others missed. It was the shallow, continuous drag mark of something light, and beside it, half obscured by a boot print, was a small, scuffed mark, the toe of a child's shoe. Her jaw tightened. Her private mission, the hunt for the stolen people, had just violently collided with this rancher's private war. The men who smashed this trough were the same men who had taken the girls. Cole turned to face her, his shoulders slumped. He looked at this strange, silent woman. "You are not a cook," he stated. She met his gaze. "I can cook. You handled that pistol like a scout. You navigated a blind storm. You splinted a horse's leg in a gale. Cooks do not do that." "I do," she said. He waited for an explanation. None came. He saw the scar, the watchful eyes. He saw a woman who was a walking secret. But he also saw the woman who had saved his horses and, perhaps, his life. He was out of time. He was out of options. He took a deep breath, the air still thick with dust. I have a cattle drive to run. I have 10 days to save my ranch. I need a cook. I need a hand. I am here, Ayanna said. A verbal agreement. Then, he said, holding out his hand, not for a handshake, but as a gesture, you cook, you help, you do whatever it is you do. When we get back from Santa Fe, I pay you, and I do not ask about your past. Ayanna looked at the hand, but did not take it. You ask no questions, she said, and I will keep your crew fed for 10 days. She turned and walked toward the small bunkhouse, where the kitchen was. The contract was set. It was not a contract of paper and ink. It was a contract of desperation and secrets, sealed in the red dust of a dying land. The kitchen in the bunkhouse was small, suffocatingly hot, and smelled of bacon grease and old wood smoke. Cole's two remaining hands, an older, wiry man named Silas and a boy barely 20 named Billy, sat at the rough plank table. They watched Ayanna with open suspicion. She moved with a quiet, deliberate economy. The sandstorm had fouled the small rain barrel, and the broken trough meant the yard was a sea of mud. The bitter spring itself was now sacred, its slow trickle reserved for the horses and the cattle, for cooking. She had one small cask of potable water. It was half full. She assessed the meager provisions: salt pork, a sack of hardtack biscuits, dried beans, and a small crate of shriveled corn. Silas and Billy expected a heavy meal after the storm. They expected boiled beans and bacon. Ayanna did not light the main stove. It used too much wood and would turn the room into an oven. Instead, she built a small, controlled fire in the side hearth. She took a pot, poured in a single cup of water, and set it to boil. Over this, she fixed a damp cloth, stretching it tight. She laid the cobs of corn on the cloth. She was steaming them, not boiling them. Not one drop of water would be wasted. She shaved the salt pork into paper-thin strips and fried them hard in a skillet, the grease popping. The meal she served was sparse 3 strips of salty pork, a hardtack biscuit, and a half cob of steamed corn for each man. Silas looked at his plate and then at Cole. This ain't much of a meal, boss. We've been fighting that storm all night. Cole, who had been watching Ayanna, looked at his hand. His voice was flat. It is hot, and she did not waste a cup of water. You will eat it. Ayanna herself did not eat. She stood by the door, watching the ridges, her face turned toward the setting sun. When the men were finished, she took their plates. She did not rinse them. She scrubbed them clean with a handful of salt and a dry rag. The small amount of water left in the steaming pot, she carefully poured back into the cask. Cole watched, a strange, grudging respect settling in. She understood. She knew the arithmetic of the drought. She practiced the discipline of survival. They moved to the porch to escape the heat of the kitchen. The evening offered no relief. The air was still, heavy, and tasted of dust. Cole looked at the one full barrel of water he kept by the porch, his last emergency reserve. The sound was not loud. It was a high, thin zip, followed by the solid thwack of lead hitting wood. A dark hole appeared, low on the side of the full barrel. A stream of water, black in the twilight, gushed out. Billy cried out and dropped his tin cup. Silas, a veteran of border skirmishes, was off his stool and flat on the porch boards in an instant. Cole, frozen in disbelief, stared at the stream of his last good water pouring into the dirt. Ayanna moved. She did not drop. She sprang. In one motion, she grabbed the collar of Cole's shirt and hauled him backward, off the stool and through the open doorway. He landed hard on the kitchen floor. A second shot splintered the wooden stool where he had been sitting. A third slammed into the doorframe, sending a spray of white wood chips into the room. Then silence. From the high ridge, a quarter of a mile away, the heavy boom of a long-range rifle finally rolled across the valley. Silas crawled into the kitchen. Billy followed, pale and shaking. Ayanna was already at the window, peering through a crack. "One rifle," she said. her voice calm. "Hi. He is gone now." Cole's heart hammered against his ribs. He got to his feet, his hands shaking with rage. He stalked back onto the porch. The barrel was empty. A dark, spreading stain on the ground was all that remained. His eyes caught something new. Pinned to the porch post, just below the fresh bullet scar, was a piece of paper. It had been fixed with a skinning knife. He tore the knife out and ripped the paper down. The words were crude, written in charcoal. "Sell the land to Quinn, or the next barrel is your skull. The rocks are thirsty." This was not a warning. It was a sentence. The next morning, the mood was sour. Silas and Billy were packing their rolls. "We are sorry, boss," Billy said, not meeting his eyes. "But this ain't ranchin'. This is a war. We ain't getting paid to get shot by snipers." Cole did not have the energy to argue. Let them go. He was alone. Except for her. Ayanna was in the yard, examining the hooves of the one good wagon horse, seemingly unconcerned. A rider approached. Cole recognized the gray gelding. It was Deputy Ezra Pike. The young deputy looked more tired than usual, his badge the only clean thing on him. He dismounted, avoiding Cole's eyes. He held a folded paper. "Cole, I am sorry. I have to serve this." Cole took the paper. His first thought was that it was an arrest warrant for Quinn. It was not. It was a proclamation. A Drought Emergency Act, passed by the county commission that very morning. It cited the critical water shortage. It instituted an immediate water conservation tax. He read the words, his blood running cold. Any rancher drawing water from a spring that feeds a county-recognized waterway must pay a monthly tax of $5 per head of cattle. Quinn's new dam had turned the Bitter Springs small runoff into a county-recognized waterway. $5 a head, $500. "This is not law," Cole said, his voice a low rasp. "This is theft." Ezra Pike looked miserable. "It was voted on this morning. Cole, the whole commission. Mr. Quinn presented it. He said it was the only way to fairly manage the shortage, to fund a new community pipeline." "He is the shortage," Cole yelled, the paper shaking in his hand. "He dammed the water, and now he is taxing me for the trickle he left behind." "I know, but it is legal. My hands are tied. I just served the papers." Ezra looked at the bullet-riddled barrel. "Looks like you have other troubles." "They are the same trouble, Ezra." The deputy nodded, his face etched with shame. He mounted his horse and rode away. The law had just tightened the noose. Later that afternoon, a small buckboard wagon rattled into the yard. It was Maggie Doyle. She was alone. She brought the sacks of flour and beans Cole had ordered weeks ago. Ayanna came from the stable to help unload. Maggie pulled Cole aside, her face pale under its layer of dust. Her voice was a low, urgent whisper. "Cole, this is not a supply run. I came because I am afraid. I cannot speak in town." Ayanna, stacking flour sacks nearby, did not look up, but her movement slowed. She was listening. "It is about 2 of the girls," Maggie whispered, her hands twisting in her apron. 2 new ones. Sochon sisters. They were helping me clean the saloon last night. They went out the back door to dump the mop water, and they did not come back." Ayanna went still. Cole felt a cold dread. "Voss." "I do not know," Maggie said, her voice breaking. "But Ezra, he found this by the back step. He thought it was just trash." She held out a small, dirty rag. "It has a smell, Cole, sweet, like chemicals." Ayanna turned. She walked toward them, her steps silent. She did not ask permission. She took the rag from Maggie's hand. She raised it slowly. Not to her nose, but just close enough to catch the faint odor. Her expression, usually so guarded, shifted. Her eyes, which had been watchful, narrowed. A memory surfaced, cold and sharp. "Chloroform," Ayanna said. Her voice was flat. Cole and Maggie stared at her. "It is mixed," Ayanna continued, her gaze distant ether, and something else, something heavy, to make it stick to the cloth. She looked at Maggie, her eyes now terrifyingly clear. I know this smell. I smelled it at the border, the night they took the wagon. This was it, the proof. The men who were stealing the water were the same men who were stealing people. Her hunt and his war were the same. Maggie looked from Ayanna to Cole, her face stricken with fear. What do I do? You go back to town, Ayanna said. Her voice was no longer that of a cook. It was a command. You watch. You listen. You do not speak of this. Maggie nodded, her eyes wide. She climbed into her buckboard and, with a snap of the reins, fled the ranch. Cole turned to Ayanna. His mind was a storm of bullet holes, legal papers, and now, missing girls. This changes everything, Cole said, his voice shaking. This is not just land. This is kidnapping. This is a federal crime. He grabbed onto the idea like a lifeline. The law. Ezra is weak, but the law is not. I will ride to Santa Fe. I will get a federal marshal. I will sue Quinn. I will use the law against him. Ayanna looked at him, her face a mask. She dropped the foul rag in the dust. The law, she said, as if the word tasted bad. Yes, the law, Cole insisted. Pacing the porch, it is all we have. We cannot fight Voss and his men, not with guns, but a marshal can. Ayanna stepped in front of him, blocking his path. Her stillness was a challenge. Your law, she said, her voice quiet, is a piece of paper that strangles you. Your law is a bullet in your water barrel. Your law is 2 girls gone in the night. It is all I have, he repeated, his desperation clear. I am a rancher. I am not a killer. I will not become like them. I am not asking you to kill, Ayanna said. I am asking you to see. The law in San Diablo is Bartholomew Quinn. The judge eats at his table. The commission takes his money. Your deputy is afraid. A federal marshal is 5 days' ride from here. Those girls do not have 5 days. The gulf between them was vast. He was a man of principles, of fences, of ledgers and courts. He clung to the belief that the system, however slow, was just. She was a woman of the frontier, of the earth. She believed in what she could see, what she could touch, and what she must do. She followed the living law survive. So what do we do? Cole demanded, his frustration boiling over. What do you suggest we ride into town? Guns blazing, that is suicide. No, Ayanna said. We do not fight. Not yet. We see, we learn. See what? Learn what? A spider does not show you his web. You must find it. Quinn has a dam. Voss has men. They are stealing water. They are stealing girls. We need to know where. We need to know how. She looked up at the pale sliver of the moon, visible in the harsh blue of the afternoon sky. In 2 nights, the moon is new. The sky will be dark. It took him a moment. Then he understood. You want to go to the dam. I want to see the dam, she corrected him. I want to see what he is building. I want to see how many men he has. I want to find the trail of those girls. You cannot sue a man if you do not know his true crimes. It was not a request for a gunfight. It was a request for reconnaissance, for evidence. That was a language Cole could understand. Just us, he asked. My hands they quit? Just us, she said. They talk too much anyway. He let out a long breath. It was a terrible risk. But staying here, waiting for the tax collector or the next bullet, was a guaranteed death. All right, Cole said, his voice firming with resolve. 2 nights. We will ride. We will go and see the water thief at work. Ayanna nodded once. She turned and walked back to the kitchen, picking up a sack of flour as if the conversation and the declaration of war had never happened. Cole was left alone on the porch, staring at the bullet holes, the tax notice in his hand, and the dark stain in the dust where his last good water had been. 2 nights later, the moon was a fingernail paring, lost behind a high, thin gauze of cloud. The world was rendered in shades of blackened charcoal. Ayana and Cole had left their horses a mile back, hobbled in a dry wash. They moved on foot, Ayana in the lead. She did not walk. She seemed to flow over the broken ground, her feet making no sound on the gravel and cracked earth. Cole, for all his years on the land, felt like a bull crashing through a thicket. Every step he took seemed to echo in the canyon. He concentrated on placing his boots exactly where she had placed hers. Ayana stopped. She raised a hand. Cole froze. He could hear it now, the low murmur of men's voices, the clink of a tool on rock. Ahead, a single lantern burned, a pinprick of yellow in the suffocating dark. They crept to the edge of a small rise. Below them was the dam. It was larger than Cole had expected, a raw scar of new timber and mounded earth, choking the narrowest part of the canyon. The small reservoir behind it was already filling, a black mirror reflecting no stars. This was the water Bartholomew Quinn was stealing. Ayana was not looking at the dam. She slid down the embankment, silent as smoke, and moved past the construction. Cole followed, his heart hammering. She was moving toward the front of the dam, to the dry bed where the tributary used to flow toward his bitter spring. The stream bed was not just dry, it was dead. Ayana knelt, touching the mud. She moved along a faint depression in the ground, her fingers reading the earth like a blind woman reading a book. Cole watched, baffled. She stopped at a spot that looked no different from any other. She began to dig with her hands, pulling away the loose rock and soil. She uncovered a flat, metal plate, hidden by a foot of dirt. She found the edge and lifted. It was heavy, but she moved it. Beneath it was a junction of pipes, a massive lead pipe, easily 2 feet wide, angled down, disappearing deep into the aquifer. A smaller pipe led off toward the new reservoir. Cole understood in a sickening rush. Quinn was not just damming the surface water. He had tapped the deep underground spring itself. He was draining the aquifer, bleeding the land dry from beneath, redirecting the very source of the bitter spring. Ayana pointed. Cole fumbled for a sulfur match. He struck it on his boot. The sudden, brief flare was blinding. In the flash, Cole saw 2 things. The damp earth around the junction was covered in the distinct, hobnailed boot prints of Caleb Voss, and stenciled on the side of the lead pipe, in stark black letters, were the initials SBT, San Diablo Bank and Trust. The match burned his fingers. He dropped it, plunging them back into darkness. He had his proof. Ayana tugged his sleeve. She was not finished. She sniffed the air. Her head turned, kerosene, and the faint ammonia smell of livestock. She moved toward a small, windowless sod shed set 50 yards from the main dam, hidden in a cleft of rock. 2 men from the Red Rock outfit stood near its door, smoking cigarettes. Their red embers glowed in the dark. Ayana picked up a rock, the size of a man's fist. She looked at Cole, then pointed to the shed. She held up 2 fingers, then 1. She was giving him a signal. She hefted the rock and threw it with a powerful, flat trajectory. It landed 30 yards away, clattering down a slide of loose shale. The 2 guards cursed. One of them said to stay put. The other, braver or stupider, walked off to investigate the noise. As soon as the man was gone, Ayana was moving. She slipped past the remaining guard, a shadow detaching from the greater shadow of the cliff. Cole's breath hitched. He was supposed to follow. He took a step, but his boot scraped. The guard at the door turned. What was that? Ayana was already on him. She did not attack from the front. She rose up behind him, her hand clamped over his mouth, stifling his shout. Her other hand, holding the bone knife Cole had not seen her draw, struck once at the base of his skull. It was not a killing blow. It was a precise, brutal strike. The man went limp, a puppet with cut strings. Ayana caught him and lowered him silently to the ground. She gestured, sharp and angry. Cole ran to the shed door. It was barred from the outside. Ayana lifted the heavy wooden bar. She pushed the door open. The smell hit them first. Fear, sweat, and the sickly sweet chemical odor she had found on the rag. Chloroform. Cole struck another match. The shed was a holding pen, and in the dim, flickering light, they saw them. 3 sets of small, iron shackles were bolted to the far wall. They were low to the ground. In the straw and dirt, Cole saw a discarded tin cup and a half-eaten piece of bread. Ayanna moved past him, her eyes scanning the floor. She knelt. Her hand, which had been so steady in the fight, trembled as she picked up a small scrap of fabric. It was a muslin scarf, a deep blue, with a single repeating pattern of beads sewn along the edge. Lipan work. She knew the pattern. It had belonged to one of the missing Shoshone girls, traded to her by a Lipan woman. This was the proof of the second crime. This was the depot. They brought them here. Outside, a shout rang out. The second guard was returning. Ayanna was on her feet. She looked at the tracks in the dust of the shed floor. They all pointed one way, north, toward the Silver Widow mine. The shout came again, this time an alarm. The first guard had been found. Ayanna grabbed Cole's arm. "We go." They burst from the shed and ran for the rise where they had left the horses. Lights flared to life behind them. Men from a nearby bunkhouse, part of the Red Rock outfit, poured out, rifles in hand. Gunshots exploded in the night. The bullets cracked over their heads. They reached the horses. Ayanna sliced the hobbles with her knife. Cole threw himself into the saddle. They rode. They galloped down the narrow canyon, the only way out. The clatter of their horses' hooves was deafening, a desperate drumbeat. A flash of light from the canyon rim above them. A split second later, the heavy boom of a sniper's rifle echoed. A chip of rock exploded from the wall near Cole's head. The sniper was high, watching for them. They raced on. Ayanna suddenly reined in, pulling her horse back. Cole, confused, almost ran past her. The sniper fired again, the bullet kicking up dust where they would have been. Ayanna was pulling something from her pocket. It was a small, round object, her signal mirror. There was almost no moon, but the sniper had his own lantern. She angled the mirror, catching the distant light. She flashed it against the far canyon wall, a tiny, moving spark. The sniper took the bait. He fired at the false target. "Now!" Ayanna yelled. They spurred their horses. As they rounded the last bend, Cole saw it. A heavy lantern, hung on a post at the canyon mouth. A rope led from it. An alarm station, meant to signal another camp further down the line. Cole did not think. He ripped his Winchester from its scabbard. He was a rancher, not a gunman, but he knew how to shoot from a saddle. He raised the rifle, aimed at the distant yellow light, and fired. The world was bouncing. The shot went wide. He fired again. The lantern exploded in a shower of glass and burning kerosene. The canyon mouth was plunged into darkness. They broke through the checkpoint, disappearing into the open desert, leaving the shouting and chaos behind. They did not slow for 2 miles. They smelled the smoke before they saw the glow. Cole's heart stopped. He spurred his horse, a terrible, cold dread filling him. It was not the main house. He rounded the last hill. It was the birthing shed, his new cattle shed, the one he had built with his own hands after Martha died. It was a roaring pillar of flame, the dry wood crackling, sending embers high into the night sky. "Voss, it was retaliation, immediate and brutal." Cole leaped from his horse, his mind blank with panic. The calves. The spring calves were in the adjoining corral. The fire was spreading to the fence. The small animals were huddled against the far side, bawling in terror. Cole ran for the gate, but a wall of flame beat him back. The heat was scorching, blistering his skin. He could not get through. Ayanna grabbed him, pulling him away from the fire. "No!" he shouted, struggling against her. "The calves." She slapped him hard. His shock was total. He stopped struggling. She pointed. Not at the fire, but 50 yards away, toward the dry creek bed. "The breathing well," she commanded. "The one Red Sand showed you." He stared. The old Navajo man, Red Sand, had visited the ranch a year ago. He had pointed to a shallow, rock-lined pit, dug by people long gone. He had told Cole it was a well that breathed. He had shown Cole how it connected to a network of small, dry caves under the pasture, a way to find cool air in the summer. Cole had thought it was just old stories. Ayanna was already there, pulling at the heavy, flat stones that covered the opening. Cole understood. It was not a well, it was a tunnel. He ran back to the corral, ignoring the blistering heat. He grabbed a burning fence post and used it as a lever, smashing the latch on the far gate, the one that opened away from the fire. He plunged into the smoke, his lungs burning. He kicked and shoved the terrified calves, driving them out of the pen, away from the burning shed. They scattered. Ayanna was at his side. She moved with a purpose, whistling low, using her jacket to herd the animals. Together, they pushed the half-dozen calves toward the creek bed, toward the dark hole Ayanna had uncovered. One by one, they forced the panicked animals down into the subterranean darkness. They got the last one in just as the main roof of the shed collapsed in a volcano of sparks. They fell to the ground, coughing, their bodies covered in soot, their lungs full of ash. The shed was gone, but the calves, the future of his herd, were alive, safe in the cool earth. Dawn came, gray and smelling of ash. Cole sat on the ground, his hands raw. He looked at the smoking ruins. He looked at Ayanna, who was drawing water from the main well, her face grim. He walked over to her. He was a man broken and remade in one night. "They would be dead," he said, his voice hoarse. "I would have run into the fire. I forgot the well. I thought it was just superstition." Ayanna pulled up the bucket. She did not look at him. "You see the law," she said. "I see the land. The land knows how to survive." He finally nodded. He had been trying to fight Quinn with paper. Ayanna was fighting Voss with the earth itself. The bond between them, forged in the sandstorm, was now hardened in fire. He respected her. More than that, he trusted her. They were washing the soot from their faces when two riders approached. It was Ezra Pike, and with him, Maggie Doyle. Ezra looked at the burned shed, his face pale. "Cole, this has to stop." Cole thought he was being lectured. He was wrong. "I cannot arrest Voss for this," Ezra said, his voice shaking with a cold anger Cole had not heard before. "I have no proof he was here, but I have been digging." Ezra pulled papers from his saddlebag. "I went to the county seat. I did not look for Voss. I looked for Quinn." He held up a ledger sheet. "It is not just the commission vote. Cole, Quinn owns them. Every one. I found the loan agreements. I found the notes. He paid off every gambling debt, every delinquent property tax. For all 3 commissioners, a week before they voted on your new water tax. It was bribery, clear, legal, and provable." Maggie, meanwhile, was directing Ezra to unload her wagon. She had not just brought food. She had brought a strange assembly of copper tubing, a large kettle, and several sheets of glass. She looked at the ruined water barrel, riddled with bullet holes. "I heard what they did," she said, her voice defiant. "If they will not let us have clean water, we will make it ourselves." She began to set up a solar still, a contraption to evaporate the brackish water from the lower pasture and collect the clean steam. It was a slow, agonizing process. It would not save the herd, but it was an act of defiance. It was a way to make life. That evening, the 3 of them stood by the new, slow drip of Maggie's still. They had the evidence, the lead pipe, the bank stencil, the shackles, the scarf, the bribery receipts. But Voss was still out there. The herd was still starving. Cole made a decision. It was the only one left. "We are starting the cattle drive," he said. "Tonight." Ayanna looked at him. confused. To Santa Fe, you will not make it 10 miles. Voss will be waiting. I know, Cole said. It is what they expect me to do. I am a desperate rancher, trying to save his herd. He looked at Ezra. It is a diversion. They will follow the cattle. They will think I am finished, while they are watching me and the herd. You, Ezra, will take these receipts to the territorial judge in Santa Fe. You will bypass the county. He turned to Ayanna. And you, they will not be watching the ranch. They will be watching the cattle. You will go north. You will find the Silver Widow mine. It was a gamble, a desperate, three-handed play, but it was the only one they had. They would fight on all fronts: the land, the law, and the rescue. The diversion was a grim affair. Cole pushed the last 100 head of his starving cattle into the main trail, a cloud of alkali dust rising against the bruised purple of the twilight. The plan felt thin. Ezra Pike was already 2 hours gone, riding hard for Santa Fe with the damning ledger sheets in his saddlebag, his face a mask of grim determination. Now, it was just Cole and Ayanna. He had expected her to ride north, to begin her search for the Silver Widow mine. She had shaken her head. They expect you to be alone, she said, checking the cinch on her saddle. They will hit you. They will want to finish you. Not just the herd. I will stay until the diversion is done. So they rode, one on each flank of the miserable herd, pushing them toward the hidden arroyo. The arroyo was a deep, dry scar in the earth, a gash of sandstone and shale that offered the only path through the high mesas. It was also a perfect, inescapable trap. They entered the arroyo just as the last light failed, the high rock walls closing in, amplifying the sound of the hooves and the low, mournful calls of the cattle. The air was still, too still. It began with a single shot, a muzzle flash, high on the rim to their right. A lead slug kicked up dust a yard from Cole's horse. The herd, already skittish, stopped. They milled, their heads turning in confusion. Then the rim exploded. A dozen rifles opened fire, the shots echoing like a string of cannon fire in the narrow space. Voss was not just scaring them. This was an extermination. The cattle panicked. They turned back, stampeding toward the mouth of the arroyo, crashing into the animals behind them. It was a solid mass of terror and horns. Cole fought his horse, trying to turn the herd. It was useless. He was one man against a wave. He drew his rifle. No, Ayanna shouted, her voice cut through the gunfire. She spurred her horse, not away from the gunfire, but into the heart of the stampeding herd. She was a phantom, weaving through the panicked animals. She put 2 fingers to her mouth and let out a whistle. It was not a cowboy's call. It was a high, piercing shriek, a sound that cut through the roar of the guns, a sound like a hawk striking. The lead animals, already mad with fear, heard this new, sharp command. She was not trying to stop them. She was leading them. She turned her horse, forcing her way through the herd, and drove them straight at the sheer wall of the arroyo, the very wall where the riflemen were firing from. The cattle, with nowhere else to go, followed her lead. They slammed against the shale embankment, a wave of horn and hide, trying to climb the walls. The dry ground, pulverized by 100 hooves, exploded. A cloud of red dust, thick as night, rose from the arroyo floor, instantly blinding everyone. The gunfire became sporadic, men firing blind. Ayanna was at Cole's side. Her voice was calm in the chaos. The dust. Stay in it. She slid from her horse. She was gone, her knife in her hand, a ghost in the red fog. Cole understood. He was the distraction. He fired his rifle at the muzzle flashes above, forcing them to keep their heads down. The arroyo was a bedlam of bellowing cattle, shouting men and ricocheting bullets. He heard a single, muffled cry from the darkness, a sound of surprise cut short. Then, Ayanna was back. She was not alone. She was dragging a man from the Red Rock outfit, his rifle left behind. He was choking, his leg bent at a terrible angle. He must have been dislodged by the cattle and fallen from the rim. She threw the man at Cole's feet. "Tie him!" She was back on her horse, the hawk whistle cutting the air again. She drove the remnants of the herd back down the arroyo, pushing them out into the open desert, where they scattered into the night. The diversion was complete. The herd was gone. They dragged the prisoner a mile from the arroyo, behind a cluster of boulders. The man was in agony. His leg was shattered. Cole, his face black with soot and dust, stood over him. "Where are they?" The man, his face pale with pain. "Just spat. Go to hell, rancher!" Cole's control snapped. He was thinking of the burned shed, the bullet in his water barrel. He raised his rifle, pressing the barrel to the man's forehead. "Talk, or I will send you there." The man flinched, but he held his tongue. Ayanna pushed Cole's rifle away. Her eyes were cold, holding no heat, no anger. She knelt beside the prisoner. She looked at his broken leg. Then she looked up at the vast, empty sky, where a coyote was already calling to its pack. She said nothing. She just waited. The man understood. He knew this kind of cold. Cole's anger was survivable. Her patience was not. To be left here, with a broken leg and no water, was not a quick death. All right, he gasped, the sweat beading on his face. "The mine?" "What mine?" Cole demanded. "Silver Widow, the old silver mine, north of here. That is where Voss keeps them." "Keeps them," Ayanna said, her voice flat. He holds them there," the man stammered. "His bravado gone. For shipment. Quinn, he finds buyers. Saloons up north, mining camps. They pay top dollar." Ayanna's eyes closed for a single second. "When?" she asked. 2 days. A wagon is coming in 2 days. They will be gone." Cole's face was a mask of rage. He looked at Ayanna. "We ride. Now. We ride to that mine." Ayanna stood up. She shook her head. "No." "What do you mean?" "No," Cole shouted. "There are girls. They are selling them. We have to go." "You are a rancher," she said, her voice sharp. "I am a scout. You are thinking with your heart. You must think with your head. You ride in there now. 2 of you. Against Voss knows how many men you will die. And the girls will die with you. We cannot wait. We do not wait. We plan. We see. We do not charge into the dark." The conflict between them was stark, a flashpoint in the middle of the desert. His hot, righteous fury against her cold, calculating patience. She stepped closer to him. Her voice was low, intense. "One night of bad planning," she said, her eyes locked on his. "One lifetime of regret. I will not let that happen." As they stood, locked in this battle of wills, the air changed. The wind, which had been hot, turned cold. The stars disappeared, erased by a fast-moving bank of clouds. The air grew thick, electric. Then the sky split open. It was not the gentle rain they prayed for. It was a monsoon, a violent tropical storm that had wandered far north. The wind howled, and the rain came down in solid, horizontal sheets. Lightning spider-webbed across the sky, turning the desert from black to blinding white in an instant. They dragged the prisoner into a shallow overhang, a small cave carved into the rock. The storm was a deafening roar. A bolt of lightning struck the ridge directly above them. The explosion was absolute. The sound, a physical blow. The ground shook. Cole reacted without thinking. He saw the rock above Ayanna's head fracture. He lunged, shoving her hard against the back wall of the small cave. He was not fast enough for himself. A shower of sharp, shattered granite rained down. A piece, heavy and sharp as an axe head, caught him on the left forearm. He cried out, a sharp intake of breath. He looked down. A deep, 4-inch gash ran from his wrist toward his elbow. It was not a scrape. It was a wound. Dark blood pulsed from it, pouring over his hand and dripping onto the cave floor. Ayanna was on her feet. She tore a strip of cloth from her own shirt and wrapped it tight around his bicep, a makeshift tourniquet. She pulled her small roll from her saddlebag. She built a fire in the middle of a windstorm with wet wood. She coaxed a small, bright, almost smokeless flame to life. She took out a small, curved needle and a length of deer sinew. She held the needle in the flame, cleaning it. The prisoner watched, his eyes wide with fear and a strange respect. Ayanna knelt in front of Cole. "Give it to me." He held out his arm. The blood was still flowing. She unwrapped the tourniquet slightly, her movements precise. She began to sew. The needle was sharp. The pain was clean. He did not flinch. He watched her face, illuminated by the small fire. Her brow was furrowed in concentration. "You have done this before," he said, his voice quiet under the roar of the rain. She did not look up. The needle passed in and out of his skin. "Yes." She paused, pulling the sinew tight. "I was a scout," she said, her voice so low he had to lean in. "For the army, for a time, then for private wagons. I guided a wagon train from El Paso. It was not supplies. It was women, wives for settlers, dancers for saloons, all kinds." She tied off a stitch. "We were attacked. Comanches. I was young. I was fast. I thought fast was the same as smart. I told them to run. I should have told them to circle. I tried to lead the warriors away." She stopped. The silence in the cave stretched, filled only by the storm and the prisoner's pained breathing. "When I came back," she continued, her voice empty, "I had to do a lot of sewing. On the ones who lived." She looked up at him. Her eyes were dark, haunted by a fire worse than the one that took his shed. "I was fast," she said, "but I was not ready. I was not smart. I will not make that mistake again. Cole, not for those girls." The way she said his name, Cole, not boss, not rancher, settled in his chest. He looked at the wound, at her steady hands. The pain was real, but it was distant. The storm, the ambush, the mine, it all faded. He saw only this woman, who carried a failure so deep it had reshaped her. "I am not afraid of Voss," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Or Quinn, or losing the ranch. I am not even afraid of dying." He looked past her, at the wall of rain. "I have been half dead since Martha and Thomas, since the fever. I have been ranching ghosts. What I am afraid of is this." He gestured at the empty, dark desert. "The silence? Being alone? I am afraid of the emptiness. It is bigger than this whole territory. It is worse than dying." Ayanna finished the last stitch. She tied the knot with a sharp, practiced pull. She did not move. She looked at his confession, laid bare on the cave floor between them. She had shared her scar, the one on her soul. He had shared his, the scar on her face. The one that pulled her mouth into a permanent line of tension seemed to soften. A small, slow, almost imperceptible smile touched her lips. It was not a smile of humor. It was a smile of recognition. It was the most beautiful, painful thing he had ever seen. Dawn broke, clean and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the desert smelling of wet sage and ozone. The prisoner was tied securely. His leg splinted as Ayanna had splinted the horse's leg. Cole left him the man's own canteen. "We will send the deputy for you," Cole said. The man just nodded, his fight gone. The herd was gone. Scattered to the four winds, the diversion was a spectacular, costly success. Cole and Ayanna mounted their horses. They were not boss and hired hand. They were not a white man and an Apache woman. They were two people, bound by wounds and a shared, impossible purpose. They turned their horses, not toward Santa Fe, not toward the scattered herd, but back toward Red Mesa. The law was riding east. The war was waiting for them in the north. They rode back to the broken spur under a sky scrubbed clean by the storm. The ranch was a graveyard. The smoking ruin of the birthing shed was a black, jagged tooth against the sunrise. The cattle were gone, scattered for 20 miles. The only life was the injured horse, standing patiently by the stable, and the calves, safe in the cool earth of the breathing well. Maggie Doyle was waiting for them. She had returned from San Diablo, her face tight with worry. She had brought a wagon loaded not with supplies, for there were few to be had, but with bandages, laudanum, and blankets. She saw Cole's bandaged arm and his soot-stained face, and her own went pale. With her was Red Sand. The old Navajo man sat on his horse near the bitter spring, watching the slow, muddy trickle. He had not come with Maggie. He had simply arrived, as if summoned by the land's pain. They gathered in the kitchen. It was the only room in the entire ranch that felt alive. The plan was stark, laid bare on the scrubbed pine table. Ezra Pike was riding for the law. A 5-day journey at best. The wagon was coming for the girls in 2 days. The mission was split. Ayanna and Red Sand would go for the Silver Widow mine. They knew the land, the secret paths. Cole, with his injured arm, would stay. He would meet Ezra on his return. He would be the face of the legal fight, the man who would bring Bartholomew Quinn down in his own courthouse. Maggie would stay at the ranch, preparing it as a sanctuary, a place to receive the girls, a place to heal. The rest of the day was spent in silent, grim preparation. Cole cleaned his rifle, his left arm stiff and aching, the stitches Ayanna had sewn pulling tight. Maggie boiled water and tore sheets into long strips. Ayanna moved like a shadow. She checked her pistol, oiled the simple mechanism. She sharpened her bone knife and her skinning knife until the edges were whispers. Night fell. It was the eve of the assault. Red Sand had already left, a ghost melting into the twilight, gone to scout the approaches to the mine. Maggie, her face drawn with exhaustion, went to the main house to prepare the beds, leaving a pot of thin bean soup simmering on the hearth. The kitchen was quiet. The only sound was the low hiss of the fire. The air was thick with unspoken things, the confessions in the cave, the shared terror of the arroyo, the cold knowledge of what the next day would bring. Ayanna was cooking. It was a wordless, deliberate ritual. She was not the hired cook anymore. She was a warrior preparing for battle. But the habit remained. She took the last of the cornmeal and a little of the brackish water from Maggie's still. She added a pinch of salt. She was making ash cakes, the simplest, most frugal of meals. Cole sat at the table, his arm resting on the wood. He watched her. Her movements were economical. She did not waste a single grain of meal, a single drop of water. He was watching a discipline so profound it was almost a prayer. The firelight played across the scar on her face, softening the line of it. She cooked the small cakes on the hot stones of the hearth, the smell of toasted corn filling the small room. It was warm, safe. It felt, for a moment, like a home. He realized his fear of loneliness was gone. It had been burned out of him, first by the fire, then by the storm. She took 2 tin plates and set them on the table. One for him, one for her. She placed 2 small, hot ash cakes on each plate. She sat down opposite him. They ate in silence. The food was rough, gritty, but it was hot. It was life. Ayanna stopped, her hand halfway to her mouth. She looked at him, her dark eyes unreadable in the flickering light. She had been in Red Mesa for over a week, and he realized he had never truly heard her speak. Not beyond commands or warnings. She was quiet for a long time. Then she spoke. Her voice was low and held a strange, brittle quality he had not heard before. Should I undress before dinner? Cole froze. The tin plate in his hand felt suddenly heavy. The words made no sense. He looked at her, his mind struggling to catch up. He saw no humor in her face. No invitation. He saw only a terrible, dangerous stillness. And then he understood. He had heard the whispers in town, before the storm. He had seen the way men looked at him when he rode with her. He remembered Maggie's warning, the one she had given him when she first arrived. Quinn's men, they are spreading stories. Coal, filth. They are saying you lost your wife and went mad, that you did not hire a cook, that you bought an Apache woman to warm your bed. He had dismissed it as tavern sludge, the kind of poison that men like Voss spread for sport. He looked at Ayanna now. She was testing him. She was holding up that ugly, cruel rumor between them, holding it in the warm, safe light of the kitchen, and forcing him to look at it. She was asking him what he saw. Was she the partner who had saved his life in the sandstorm, the scout who had fought beside him in the arroyo, the woman who had stitched his arm in the cave, or was she the last, desperate possession of a broken man? He put his plate down on the table, very slowly. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet, respectful. That is the story they tell, is it not? Ayanna did not move. Her eyes held his. He shook his head, not in denial, in clarification. You are not a cook, Ayanna. You are not a woman I hired. You are the scout I ride with. You are the partner who found the proof. You are the one who saved my calves. You are the one who kept me from bleeding to death. He leaned forward. He was not just answering a question. He was making a vow. We will eat this dinner tonight. We will eat it as equals. Tomorrow, we will fight. We will fight as friends. He let out a long, slow breath. He had to say the rest. He owed her the complete truth. If we are alive, he said, his voice rough. If we survive tomorrow, if we see those girls safe, and we see Quinn in chains, then we can talk about other things, about the future, about love, but not now. Not like this. Not as a bargain. Not as a payment for a meal. You are not for sale, and you are not a hired hand. The tension in her shoulders did not just ease, it broke. It was as if a set of tightly wound strings had been cut. The woman who had faced down snipers and storms, who had killed a man with a bone knife, looked at him, and for a second, he saw the person she was before the world had carved its scars into her. She finished her meal. She stood up. She walked to the small bundle of her possessions by the door. She reached into it. When she came back, she was holding a small, tightly woven braid of red and black wool. It was old, the colors faded. This was my mother's, she said. She gave it to me when I left the reservation. She said it holds the good winds. It is a shield. She held it out to him. Not to his hand. She held it out to his chest. Cole looked at the small, simple object. It was a piece of her soul. He understood what it cost her to give it away. He reached up, his hand closing over hers, over the braid. His fingers were rough against her skin. He did not have a braid. He did not have a shield. He reached into his own pocket. His fingers found the familiar, cool shape. He pulled it out. It was a small, sterling silver lighter. It was worn, its surface covered in a patina of fine scratches, but the hinge was still strong. He held it in his palm. Martha's, he said, his voice thick. She hated the dark. She loved a clean light. It has been in my pocket for 3 years. Empty. Ayanna looked at the lighter. She looked at his face. She saw the ghost he carried. She reached out and, very gently, took it from his hand. She closed her fist around it. He tucked the wool braid into the breast pocket of his shirt. It felt warm against his skin. They had exchanged their pasts. They had traded their ghosts. It was a promise more binding than any word. In the hallway that connected the kitchen to the main house, Maggie Doyle stood in the shadows. She had come back for a fresh cloth. She had stopped when she heard Cole's voice. She had not heard the words, but she had seen the exchange. She saw Ayanna give the native charm. She saw Cole, his face raw with a new and vulnerable strength, give his late wife's lighter. She saw them, not as a boss and a helper, but as two solitary, broken people, standing together in the small, warm circle of the firelight. A new family, she thought, being born in the middle of a war. She smiled, a small, weary smile. She backed away silently, leaving them to their moment. Inside the kitchen, the moment passed. The fire hissed. The mission returned. Ayanna turned to the door. The moon is high. It is time. Cole nodded. He stood up, his hand over the braid in his pocket. They stepped out of the warm kitchen. The night air was cold, sharp. The stars looked like chips of ice. Ayanna looked north, toward the black silhouette of the mountains, toward the Silver Widow mine. Cole looked east, toward the trail to Santa Fe, where he would wait for Ezra and the law. They did not say goodbye. They did not touch. They just looked at each other. One last time. Then Ayanna turned and melted into the darkness, a shadow moving toward the rocks. Cole watched her go, until she was gone. He turned and walked to the main house, the silver lighter's ghost weight gone from his pocket, replaced by the solid, warm promise of a wool braid. The two fronts of the battle had begun. The Silver Widow mine was a skeleton against the skyline. It was a place of angles and rot, its head frame a black claw scratching at the few stars. The air smelled of sulfur and cold, dead rock. Ayanna led her small party, not from the front, but from the side, a ghost in the periphery. She had her team, Red Sand, who moved not on the earth but as part of it. Maggie Doyle, her face pale but set, her hands clutching a medical bag, not a rifle. And two young men, Tom and Jesse, who had followed Maggie from town. They were barely men, boys really, but they had seen the poison of Quinn and Voss infect their town, and they had chosen a side. Red Sand led them up a narrow goat path, a route forgotten by white men, which brought them to a ridge overlooking the main yard. Ayanna lay flat, watching. 3 guards, one on the porch of the assay office, 2 playing cards by a low fire. She saw the heavy, barred door of the powder magazine. Set into the hillside, that was where they would be. She could feel Caleb Voss. He was here. His presence was a taint on the air, a pressure like a coming storm. Red Sand touched her shoulder. He pointed to the far side of the yard, at a high pile of loose slag and shale. He gave a single, slow nod. Ayanna understood. She put the small, carved bone whistle to her lips. It was not a whistle a man would recognize. It was a low, dry, clicking sound, like a cicada in the deep of night. She repeated it 3 times. It meant wait for the sky to fall. Red Sand vanished. A full minute passed. The guards by the fire shuffled their cards. Then, from the far ridge, came a noise, a low rumble, then a sharp crack, then the sliding, tearing sound of 1,000 tons of rock. Red Sand, with a single, well-placed lever, had started a small avalanche. The guards leaped to their feet, their rifles raised, staring into the darkness at the chaos of noise. "Now," Ayanna whispered. She, Maggie, and the 2 boys ran, not toward the guards, but toward the dark side of the hill, toward the ventilation shaft Red Sand had shown them. It was a black hole, covered by a heavy iron grate. While Tom and Jesse put their shoulders to the grate, prying it open with a metal bar, Ayanna watched their backs. The diversion was over. The guards were nervous, shouting to each other. The grate gave way with a low groan. "Maggie," Ayanna whispered. "You and the boys. Get them out. I will find Voss. Red Sand will be at the top. Waiting." Maggie nodded, her jaw tight, and disappeared into the earth. At that exact moment, 20 miles south, another fight began. Cole and Ezra Pike had met on the trail. Ezra was a changed man. He was not just a deputy. He carried a federal warrant from the territorial judge in Santa Fe. They were not just ranchers. They were lawmen. They stood on the ridge above the dam junction, the place Ayanna had found. The Red Rock men were there, guarding the lead pipe. They were relaxed, confident. Ezra looked at Cole. His arm was stiff, bound in Ayanna's stitches. "You are sure?" Ezra asked. Cole hefted the sledgehammer he had taken from the ranch forge. "It is not just my water, Ezra. It is the land. They are bleeding it. He was a rancher, a man who built things. Now, he had to tear something down to save everything else." Ezra raised his new rifle. "I will get their attention. You get the pipe." Ezra fired. Not at a man. He fired at the base of the old rotten timber dam Quinn had built. The bullet struck home. The guards scrambled. Just as Ayanna's had, they ran toward the dam, thinking it was an attack on the structure. Cole ran from his cover, his bad arm aching. He ran straight for the main valve junction, the iron heart of the entire theft. A guard, left behind, saw him. The man raised his rifle. Cole did not stop. A shot rang out, but not from the guard. Ezra, from the ridge, had fired. The guard fell. Cole reached the junction. He raised the sledgehammer. He brought it down on the main valve. The iron rang, but held. He raised it again. All his rage, all his fear for the land, all his memory of Martha, pouring into the blow. The iron screamed. It cracked. With a third blow, the valve housing shattered. A geyser of brown, churning water exploded from the pipe. It was a sound like a roar, like the earth itself taking its first breath in years. The water, stolen from the aquifer, was free. It poured down the dry riverbed, a torrent of mud and hope, rushing, flooding, racing toward the bitter spring. Justice was flowing. Back at the mine, Ayanna moved through the shadows. She found Voss in the assay office. He was not panicked by the rock slide. He was angry. He was shouting at a man, telling him to get the wagon ready. Ayanna entered the office. The door was open. "Voss," she said. He turned. His hand went for his pistol. He was a big man, broad and thick with muscle, his face scarred by old fights and sunburn. He saw her. He did not see a cook. He saw the warrior from the arroyo. "You!" he snarled. He fired his pistol. Ayanna was not there. She had dropped to the floor, rolling behind a heavy ore cart. The bullet splintered the desk where she had been. She kicked the brake off the ore cart. It was full, heavy. It began to roll slowly toward Voss. He fired again, the bullet ricocheting off the iron. He was trapped between the cart and the wall. He scrambled, climbing over the desk, just as the cart smashed into it. He came up, his rifle in hand. Ayanna was outside, in the yard. She stood in the open, a clear target. Voss laughed. He stepped onto the porch, raising his rifle. It was too easy. Ayanna bent, scooped up 2 handfuls of the fine, gray slag dust from the ground, and threw it high. The faint breeze caught it. It created a thick, choking curtain of grit, right in his face. Voss choked, his eyes squeezing shut. He fired blind into the cloud. Ayanna moved through the dust. He was a blind bull. She was a blade of grass. He wiped his eyes, roaring in rage. He saw her. He lunged. She met his lunge. She did not use a gun. She used her bone knife. She did not go for his throat. She moved inside his reach, under the rifle, and drove the sharpened bone deep into the bundle of nerves and muscle in his shoulder. His arm went dead. The rifle clattered to the ground. He screamed, a sound of shock and agony. He tried to grab her with his good hand. She was too fast. She struck him at the temple with the heavy, sinew-wrapped pommel of the knife. It was a single, precise, non-lethal blow. Caleb Voss, the man who had terrorized the county, crumpled into the dust he had helped create. At the dam, the victory was just as sudden. The Red Rock Guards, seeing the water gone, their leader absent, threw down their guns. Ezra and Cole tied them. They heard new riders, a group of 5 men, riding fast from San Diablo. They were led by Bartholomew Quinn. Quinn was smiling. He wore his black suit, and he sat on his fine horse, flanked by men in city clothes. "Mr. Archer," Quinn called out, his voice smooth and pleasant. "What a mess you have made." He gestured to the broken pipe. "These gentlemen," Quinn said, "are from the Pinkerton Agency. They are here on my behalf. You are under arrest. Archer, for theft of water and destruction of private property." The Pinkertons drew their pistols, their faces hard and professional. Cole looked at Ezra. Quinn had played his hand. Ezra Pike stepped forward. He pushed back his duster. The new silver badge on his chest gleamed. "Bartholomew Quinn," Ezra said, his voice carrying in the sudden silence. "These men are not Pinkertons. They are hired guns from Denver, and I am Deputy Marshal Ezra Pike." He held up the warrant. "By the authority of the United States Territorial Court, you are under arrest for conspiracy, bribery, and the illegal diversion of public waterways." Quinn's smile did not falter, but his eyes went cold. "This is nonsense. That water is mine." Ezra threw a rolled canvas onto the ground. It was the map of the lead pipes. "Your property is a tap into the public aquifer. Quinn, you are bleeding the entire county dry. This warrant gives me authority over this land and over any man who stands in my way." The hired guns looked at each other. They looked at Ezra's federal badge. They looked at Quinn. They were not being paid to fight the United States government. One by one, they lowered their guns. "At the mine!" The first shout of fire came from Tom. The fight with Voss, the overturned lantern, had lit the dry timbers of the assay office. Now, the wind was fanning it, pushing it toward the main head frame. Maggie was at the mouth of the ventilation shaft, counting the girls as Tom, Jesse, and Red Sand pulled them out. They were terrified, covered in grime, but alive. Maggie did a quick count. Her face went white. "We are missing one," she cried, "a small one, the Shoshone girl. She was hiding. She would not come." Ayanna looked at the burning office. The roof was already smoking. The doorway a sheet of orange flame. She did not hesitate. She grabbed a horse blanket from a nearby rail, soaked it in a water trough, and wrapped it around herself. She handed the cuffed Caleb Voss to Tom. "Hold him." She ran. She ran straight into the burning building. The smoke was a physical, choking thing. The heat was unbearable. She found the child in the back room, under a small cot, her eyes wide with a terror that went beyond the fire. Ayanna dropped to her knees. She did not grab the child. She spoke, her voice calm and low, in the Apache tongue. "Little sister, the fire is loud, but it is afraid of us. We walk out now. Come." The girl, hearing her own language, uncurled. Ayanna wrapped the wet blanket around her, pulled the child into her arms, and stood. A beam crashed down, blocking the way she had come. She turned, kicking open a side door, and burst out onto the porch just as the entire roof collapsed behind her in a shower of sparks and flame. She walked through the yard, through the smoke, and placed the child in Maggie Doyle's arms. The battle was over. The mine was burning. The girls were safe. Caleb Voss was in chains. Bartholomew Quinn saw it all. He saw the smoke from the mine. He saw his hired guns surrender. He saw the federal warrant in Ezra's hand. He was a banker. He knew when a debt had been called. He spun his horse, his face a mask of pure, cold hatred. "This is not over. Archer!" he screamed, his voice raw. "You think that paper saves you? I am Red Mesa. I will see you beg for a cup of this water. I will see all of you thirst in the dust." He raked his spurs and galloped away. A black figure disappearing toward San Diablo, his fortress of paper and greed. Ezra did not fire. He watched him go. The fight was won, but the war, the one for the soul of the town, was just beginning. High noon in San Diablo was a judgment. The sun was a hammer, beating down on the dust of the Central Plaza. The town held its breath. Bartholomew Quinn stood on the boardwalk in front of his white-painted bank. He was not alone. He had called in every debt, every favor. He had spread the word that an outlaw, Cole Archer, and a federal marshal with a false warrant were coming to seize the bank, to seize the town's assets, to destroy the economy. He had gathered a human shield, dozens of townsfolk, ranchers who owed him money, merchants who relied on his credit, confused, angry, and afraid. They held shotguns and old rifles, a disorganized militia protecting the man who was strangling them. Quinn, immaculate in his black suit, raised his hands. His voice was smooth, reasonable, an oil that spread over the nervous crowd. Friends, neighbors, you see before you an act of aggression, an overreach by a government that does not understand our ways. They speak of water, but they mean control. I have spent my life building this town. I invested my own capital to secure the water rights, to build the infrastructure that will see us through this drought. A man in the crowd, a store owner named Harris, shouted, "The dam is private property. Marshal, you cannot just seize it." "Property," Quinn repeated, nodding, his face a mask of civic concern. "The very bedrock of our nation, Mr. Archer, in his grief, has become unstable. He burned his own shed, he scattered his own herd, and now he attacks the very institution that keeps this town alive. This is not law, this is anarchy." The crowd murmured, their loyalties torn. They were thirsty, but they were also in debt. From the end of the street, the small procession appeared. It was not an army. Ezra Pike walked in the lead, his federal badge gleaming. Beside him was Cole Archer, his left arm in a sling, his face grim. Behind them, Maggie Doyle drove her buckboard. In the back, sitting up, were the girls, wrapped in clean blankets. Beside the wagon, silent, walked Ayanna Greyhawk, and behind them, on his gray pony, came Red Sand. They stopped at the edge of the plaza. Quinn laughed, a short, sharp bark. This is your army, Marshal, a bankrupt rancher, a saloon keeper, an old native." And he sneered at Ayanna, his cook. Ayanna stepped forward. The crowd parted for her, a ripple of unease. She was not a cook. She was not a shadow. She stood in the center of the plaza, her gaze fixed on Quinn. She held nothing in her hands. She spoke. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the oppressive heat, clear and pure. She spoke in English first. "He tells you about property. I will tell you about people. He tells you of his investment. I will tell you of his profit. He took Shoshone girls, sisters. He took a Lipan child. He took them from their families." She switched to Spanish, her words flowing, addressing the Mexican families who stood near the church. "He stole your daughters, two, Maria and Lizette, from the South County. He calls them shipments. He kept them in chains, in the dark, to sell." The crowd grew quiet. This was not about pipes and dams. This was about children. Finally, she spoke in Apache. Her voice changed, the words guttural, ancient, and full of a cold, clear rage. She spoke to the few native families huddled on the edge of the plaza, the ones no one ever looked at. She named them. She told them the hunt was over. She turned back to Quinn. "You speak of law, but you are a thief. You are a thief of water, and you are a thief of people." Quinn's face had lost its smile. Slander. "The desperate lies of a savage. Where is your proof?" Maggie Doyle stepped down from her wagon. She was no longer the worried saloon keeper. Her face was cold. She held her nursing ledger. "I have proof," she said, her voice shaking but strong. "I am not a marshal. I am not a warrior. I am a nurse, and I have treated the girls he shipped." She read from the book. Malnutrition, rope burns on their wrists and ankles, dehydration, sickness from chloroform. She read the names. She read the injuries. She was reading a list of his crimes. The crowd was stone silent. Harris, the store owner, lowered his shotgun. "This is a conspiracy," Quinn shouted, his voice cracking. "Lies! You have no—" "I have proof," Cole Archer's voice boomed. He stepped forward. He pointed to a mule, which Tom and Jesse were leading. Strapped to its back was a 4-foot section of pipe, the lead pipe from the dam. Cole walked to the mule. He looked at the crowd, at the men he had known his whole life.
"He lied to you," Cole said. "He did not just steal the water. He poisoned it."
He took a wrench from his belt. He fixed it to a valve on the side of the pipe. He put his boot on the pipe and, with his one good arm, he pulled. The valve broke open. It was not a gush of clean water. It was a thick, black, oily stream. It hit the dust of the plaza with a heavy splat, and the smell of sulfur, of lead, of chemicals, of death. It rolled over the crowd. It was the smell of the mine, the smell of the water he intended to sell back to them. A woman in the crowd screamed. "Bartholomew Quinn!" Ezra Pike's voice rang out. "Clear as a bell! The jig is up!" Ezra strode forward, holding the federal warrant high by the authority of the United States Territorial Court. The San Diablo Bank and Trust is seized. Its assets are frozen. He looked past Quinn, at the 3 county commissioners who were trying to fade into the crowd. "Mr. Harris, Mr. Breen, Mr. Taggart, the judge in Santa Fe has seen the receipts for your loans. You have one choice. You will vote, right now, to nullify the water tax and return the community water rights to the people of Red Mesa County, or you will stand in the dock with him." The 3 men looked at the crowd. They looked at the black, stinking water. Their faces were pale. "Aye," Harris said, his voice a croak.
"Aye, vote aye."
The other 2 echoed him, their voices desperate. It was over. The bank was gone. The tax was gone. The law had won. Red Sand, who had watched all of this from his pony, dismounted. He walked to the center of the plaza, his ancient staff in his hand. He ignored the black puddle of Quinn's water. He walked 10 paces past it, to a spot that looked like any other. He struck the ground, hard, with the butt of his staff. "Here," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He looked at the townsfolk. "The water is here. It has always been here. Clean, deep. You just forgot to listen." Quinn was broken. His face was a terrible mask of pure, reptilian hatred. He had lost. He saw the crowd, no longer his shield, but his jury. He saw their faces, turned against him. He was a rat in a trap. He made his last move. He did not reach for the pistol on his hip. He reached inside his coat. He pulled a 2-shot Derringer. He was not aiming at Cole. He was not aiming at Ayanna. He grabbed the nearest person, a small boy, no more than 8, who had been standing at the front of the crowd. Quinn pulled the boy in front of him, the tiny pistol pressed to the child's head. "Back!" he screamed, his voice a raw shriek. "All of you, back! Get me a horse!" Cole did not think. He did not plan. He saw the boy. He saw the gun. It was his son, Thomas. It was the fever. It was the ghosts. He lunged. He did not go for the gun. He shoved the boy, hard, pushing him away from Quinn, putting his own body in the way. The Derringer fired. The sound was small. A pop. Cole grunted. A deep, solid sound, as the lead slug tore into his right shoulder, high near the collarbone. The force spun him around, and he fell to his knees. Quinn, his hostage gone, raised the pistol again, aiming for Cole's head. A single, loud crack echoed across the plaza. It was not the Derringer. It was Ayanna's pistol. Quinn screamed. His Derringer flew from his hand, spinning in the air, clattering on the boardwalk. He clutched his right hand, his index finger and thumb a red ruin. Ayanna stood, her pistol still raised, a thin line of smoke curling from the barrel. She had not killed him. She had not even aimed at his chest. She had aimed at the threat. She had shot the gun from his hand. Her promise to Cole, her vow to herself, was kept. Quinn stared at his ruined hand. He looked at the crowd. They were advancing, all of them, The store owners, the ranchers, the vaqueros. Their faces were unified. A mask of cold, communal rage. Ezra Pike pushed through, his pistol drawn. He kicked the derringer away. "Bartholomew Quinn," he said, his voice flat and final. "You are under arrest." As Tom and Jesse hauled the screaming, bleeding banker to his feet, a shadow passed over the sun. The crowd looked up. A cloud, a dark, heavy, gray cloud. And then it began. Not a monsoon, not a violent storm. A gentle, steady, cleaning rain. The first true rain in 8 months. It began to fall on the plaza. It mixed with the black, poisoned water, washing it away. It ran in clean rivulets through the dust. It fell on Cole's face as Maggie ran to him, pressing a cloth to his new wound. It fell on Ayanna, who slowly, finally, lowered her pistol. The bitter spring, fed by the broken pipe, was already rising. The reign of thirst was over. The land and the town were being baptized. The ranch became a hospital. The rain, which had washed the blood from the plaza, now fell gently on the roof of the broken spur. A sound of healing. Maggie Doyle was in command. She had turned Cole's austere ranch house into a sanctuary. The girls, rescued from the Silver Widow mine, were safe, but they were not whole. They were ghosts, their eyes wide and vacant. Maggie worked with a fierce, maternal energy. She bathed them, her hands gentle, washing away the grime of the mine. She treated their raw wrists and ankles. She made them hot broth, spooning it herself if she had to. She sat with them through the night, not speaking, just being a warm, solid presence in the darkness, a human shield against the nightmares. Ayanna's work was different. She watched the girls huddle by the fire, flinching at every loud noise, at every shadow. She saw Maggie healing their bodies. Ayanna knew she had to heal their spirits. On the third day, the sun returned. Ayanna walked to the girls. She did not coddle them. She did not use soft words. She held out her hand. "Come," she said. She led them out of the house, away from the walls, onto the wet, clean earth. She led them to the bank of the bitter spring, which was now a happy, bubbling creek, the water high and clear. She sat them on the damp ground. "You are not shadows," she said, her voice quiet but hard as rock. "You are not glass. You are alive." She taught them. She did not teach them to cook or to sew. She took a dry stick and a piece of softwood, and she taught them to make fire with friction. She showed them how to find north by the sun. She taught them which plants to eat and which would sicken a man. Then she stood. She taught them self-defense. She showed them how to break a man's grip, not with strength, but with leverage, using his own weight against him. She showed them how a shout, a true shout from the belly, could break a man's confidence. She taught them that their bodies were their own, that to say no was a right given by the sky itself. She was not just teaching them to survive. She was giving them back their power. She was showing them that they were not defined by what had been done to them, but by what they would do next. While Ayanna rebuilt their spirits, Cole rebuilt his home. The townsfolk began to arrive, not in a mob, but one by one, their hats in their hands. They brought lumber. They brought sacks of flour, crates of apples, and 2 fat deer. Harris, the store owner, brought nails and coffee, his face a study in shame. Taggart, the commissioner, came and just started working, digging post holes, not saying a word. Cole, his right arm bound tight in a clean sling, directed them with his left. He did not rebuild the burned shed. He did not repair his fences. He pointed to the wide, open space near the gurgling well. "Here," he said. They built a new structure. It was a long, open-air pavilion. They built a massive hearth of river stone and a table long enough for 30. It was not a ranch kitchen. It was a community kitchen. That night, as the sun set, the whole of Red Mesa gathered. Maggie and the women cooked a feast. It was a celebration of free water. Cole, standing by the new hearth, took a dipper of water from the bitter spring and drank it. It was cold and sweet. He raised the dipper. He looked at his neighbors. "I was wrong," he said, his voice quiet, carrying in the cool air. "I was so busy trying to save my land. I forgot about the people on it. I believed in paper. I believed in judges and laws." He looked at Ezra Pike, who had just ridden in. "The law's good, Ezra, but it is slow, and I let my neighbors thirst while I waited. I let my pride keep me alone. I am sorry." Harris put his hand on Cole's good shoulder. "You are wrong twice. Cole, you did not wait. You fought. You and this he jested to Ayanna, who watched from the shadows. You bled for this water. We were the ones who were blind. You are forgiven." Ezra Pike stepped into the firelight. He looked older. The weight of the new badge on his chest, a silver star that read, Marshal, had settled on him. He brought news. Bartholomew Quinn was in a federal cell in Santa Fe, his hand bandaged, his political power broken. Caleb Voss was at Fort Union, facing a military court for his crimes. The Red Rock outfit was dust on the wind. The war was over. Ezra walked to Ayanna. He held a letter, its seal official. "The territorial judge sends his compliments," Marshal Pike said. "He was impressed. The army was, too. They said they have not seen a scout with your skills in a decade." He held the letter out to her. "It is an offer. An official one. Civilian scout for the United States Marshal Service. You would be based out of Red Mesa. You would have a salary. You would have my authority. You would answer to me." Ayanna looked at the paper. It was an offer of a life, a place in the white man's world, a world of paper and rules, a world that had, for the first time, recognized her. "I will think on it," she said. She folded the letter and put it in her pocket. Later, the meal was done. The sounds of laughter and conversation filled the night. It was a sound the ranch had not heard in 3 long years. Ayanna walked away from the light. She went to the spring, standing where the water bubbled up from the earth, the rain, the broken pipe. It had all washed the land clean. She reached into her pocket. She did not pull out the letter. She did not pull out the silver lighter Cole had given her. She pulled out a single, small hawk feather, its base wrapped in a worn leather thong. It was her mother's. It was the charm she had carried on her long hunt, the physical token of her vow to find the lost women. The hunt was over. The lost were found. Her past, the ghost that had driven her, was finally at peace. She knelt by the water. She touched the feather to her lips, a silent goodbye. Then she opened her hand and let it fall. The bitter spring, now a living flowing creek, caught the feather and carried it away into the darkness. She watched it go until it was gone. She stood. Cole was there, a few feet behind her. He had been watching. He walked to her side, his good shoulder almost touching hers. They stood in the comfortable silence they had built between them. He heard the offer. Cole said, "It is a good one. You earned it." Ayanna nodded, her eyes on the running water. "You could go far," he said, his voice a little rough. "See the whole territory." He looked down at his boots, then back at her. "But if you were considering other offers, I cannot offer you a badge. I cannot offer you a salary." He gestured around them, at the dark, healing land, at the sound of the water, at the distant, warm lights of the kitchen. "I can offer you clean water. I can offer you the shade of the cottonwoods I am going to plant. I can offer half of all this." He tapped his own chest with his good hand. "I can offer you a place, right here, by my side." It was not a proposal of passion. It was a proposal of peace. It was all he had. Ayanna turned to look at him. She saw the fresh stitches Maggie had put in his shoulder. She saw the weariness in his eyes, but the ghosts were gone. He was just a man, a good, mended man, standing on his own land. She was quiet for a long time. "I belong to no one. Cole Archer," she said, her voice soft, but firm as the bedrock beneath them. "Not to the army, not to a marshal. and not to you." He held her gaze. He had expected it. He nodded, his heart heavy.
"Unless I choose," she finished. A small, slow smile, the one he had seen in the cave, the one that meant she was whole, touched the corner of her mouth.
She turned from the spring and looked toward the fire, where Maggie was cutting a fresh pan of cornbread. The smell of it, warm and sweet, drifted to them. "Tonight," Ayanna said, her voice clear.
"I think I will eat dinner."
She looked back at him, her eyes holding his.
"With my family."
She began to walk toward the light. Cole stood for a moment, the sound of the spring in his ears, the word family settling in his heart. He smiled, a true, unburdened smile, and followed her home. The season turned. The gentle rain that had cleansed the plaza settled into a pattern of soft, life-giving showers. The Red Mesa High Country, which had been a map of red dust and brown, brittle grass, began to show a faint, impossible haze of green. The air itself felt washed, scrubbed clean of its desperation. The old world was gone, swept away as surely as Quinn's poisoned water. Bartholomew Quinn himself was gone, transported in a federal wagon to Santa Fe, his ruined hand bandaged, his black suit stained with the mud of the plaza he had tried to rule. He would face a territorial judge, his empire of paper and greed dismantled. Caleb Voss, his shoulder healing but his power broken, was at Fort Union, facing a military tribunal for crimes that stretched back years, including his actions against the native tribes and the desertion of his post. His reign of casual brutality was over. The Red Mesa County Commission, their face a uniform mask of pale, humbled terror, held an emergency session. They did not just repeal the water tax, they tore it up. In its place, guided by Marshal Ezra Pike and the cold, clear facts of the federal warrant, they ratified the Red Mesa Water Compact. It was a new law, a law born of shared disaster. It declared that the deep aquifers, the hidden rivers red sand had known, were the common property of all the people, to be protected and shared. The law that had been a weapon was now a shield. Cole Archer did not immediately set about rebuilding his herd. His first act of healing was not to reclaim his property, but to build for the community. He, Tom, and Jesse, joined by ranchers who had once pointed guns at him, began to dig. His right arm was still in a sling, his shoulder a landscape of fire and healing stitches, but he worked with his left, his body lean and hard. They followed Ayanna's lead, her eye unerring, as she showed them how to build a system of irrigation ditches, of acequias, that would carry the newly freed water from the bitter spring and the new community well in the plaza to the parched fields. Ayanna had not taken the marshal's letter. She had not accepted the badge. She had made her choice. She had not chosen a title, or a salary, or a place in a man's world of paper. She had chosen the earth. She had chosen the water. She had chosen to build. One afternoon, Cole stood at the gate of his ranch. The old sign, broken spur, hung crookedly, a relic of a past life, a testament to a man who had been defined by what he had lost. He was not that man. He pulled it down, the old wood splintering. Ayanna came to stand beside him. The silence between them was no longer heavy or watchful. It was a comfortable, shared space. "What will you call it now?" she asked. Cole looked at her. He looked at the new, long kitchen where Maggie was teaching the Shoshone girls to bake bread. He looked at the clean, running water. "I was thinking," he said, his voice slow, 3 languages ranch. A small, surprised light entered her eyes. He pointed. "English, for me. Spanish, for our neighbors, for the families who ride up from the south, and Apache," she finished, the words soft on her tongue. "It is a good name. It means all are welcome here." He carved the new sign himself, his left arm growing strong, his right arm slowly mending. The wood was new, and the letters were deep and clear.
Ayana's new life began by accident. The girls she and Maggie had rescued trailed after her, watching her with a mixture of awe and trust. Then, the children from the town began to come, drawn by the stories, by the quiet, scarred woman who had faced down Quinn. Soon, she had a dozen students. She did not teach them their letters or their sums. She gathered them by the new ditch, in the shade of the growing cottonwoods. She taught them what she knew. She taught them to make a clean, safe fire. She showed them how to read the patterns of the stars, not for wonder, but for direction. She showed them which plants were medicine and which were poison. She taught them to fletch small arrows, to hunt rabbits for the pot, to move without sound. And she taught all of them, the boys and the girls, the lessons she had first taught in the house. She taught them the power of their own voice. She taught them that the word no was a boundary, a right given to them at birth. She taught the boys to respect that boundary, and she taught the girls that they had a sacred right to build it. She was not just a scout. She was a teacher, forging a new generation, one that would be armed with both skill and respect. Maggie Doyle sold the thirsty spur to a young couple. She had no more taste for whiskey and desperation. She moved her belongings into the main house at the ranch, which had become the county's true center. The crisis had burned away her old life, revealing her true calling. She became the healer. She was the midwife, the one who rode out in the rain to deliver babies. She was the nurse who sat with the sick, who knew which poultice to use, which tea would break a fever. She was the heart of Red Mesa. Her hands, once worn from polishing glasses, now worn from the work of healing. Marshal Ezra Pike, for his part, became a new kind of lawman. He took Red Sand's hand-drawn map of the aquifers to Santa Fe. He returned a month later, not with soldiers, but with a quiet, thoughtful engineer from back east. The engineer, to his credit, did not laugh at the old Navajo man. He listened. He listened as Red Sand spoke of the deep, hidden rivers, of the land's memory. The engineer brought his new science, his drills, his knowledge of pumps. Together, the ancient wisdom and the new engineering, they designed a system of wells that would not bleed the land dry, that would honor the water. Ezra was not just policing the county. He was helping to build its future. The summer rains were gentle, a long, soft healing season. The land turned a deep, rich green. The air smelled of sage and wet earth. One evening, a light, warm rain was falling, drumming softly on the roof of the new, long community porch. The day's work was done. From the bunkhouse, where two new hands now lived, the sound of a fiddle drifted, a slow, simple waltz. Cole stood on the porch, watching the rain. His shoulder was almost healed, the scar a puckered, angry red. But the pain was mostly gone. He wore the wool braid Ayana had given him tucked in his shirt, where it had been every day. Ayana came to stand beside him. The firelight from the kitchen caught the lines of her face, the scar, the new softness around her eyes. She carried his silver lighter in her pocket. It was her totem now. He felt the familiar peace settle over him, the quiet that only she brought. He was not a man of fancy words. He had offered her his land, his future. She had answered by staying. He looked at her, at the woman who had saved him in a dozen different ways. He held out his left hand, the one that was not scarred, palm up. It was not a question. It was not a demand. It was an invitation. Ayana looked at his hand. She looked at his face. She put her own hand in his. He did not pull her close. He did not lead her into the rain. They stayed there, in the dry, warm shadows of the porch. They began to move, a slow, simple, swaying step. It was barely a dance. It was closer to a shared breath, an embrace set to music. The sound of the rain was their orchestra. It was not the desperate, fiery passion of a new romance. It was the deep, steady, quiet love of two partners who had seen the worst of each other and the worst of the world, and had chosen to stand together. It was a promise, held in the comfortable, shared silence. Cole rested his cheek against her hair. It smelled of wood smoke and the clean rain. "It is finally over," he whispered, his voice thick. Ayanna leaned her head against his good shoulder. She looked out at the dark, healing land, at the black, wet silhouettes of the new cottonwoods. "The fight for the water is over," she said, her voice a low murmur against his chest. "But the fight for freedom, that fight is never over." He looked down at her. "Ezra's law, that will keep us free?" She shook her head. "A small, gentle motion. The law helps. But freedom, true freedom, it does not come from a badge. It does not come from a gun." She touched the new wood of the porch railing. "It comes from clean water. And it comes from respect." The next day, Cole finished his last task at the head of the bitter spring, where the new, deep community well now stood. He set a plaque into the stone. He had carved it himself, his hand growing steady again. It was not a name. It was not a date. It was a symbol. It was the new coat of arms for the ranch, for the county. He had carved two objects, crossed, the sharpened bone knife that had saved his life, and the silver lighter that had held his ghosts. The seasons turned. The green of the new summer faded into the gold of autumn. The drought would come again. The sky would turn to brass, and the wind would blow dust. That was the law of the land, a law older than any man. But the people of Red Mesa were ready. They were not alone. They were not divided. They had their law, bought with blood. They had their community, forged in fire. And they had their knowledge, the new and the old, a foundation of respect. The new family, the one born of choice, would stand. Thank you for listening to this story. We invite you to comment on where you are listening from, so we can all connect and share our thoughts. And please subscribe to my channel Wild West Tales. Like the video, and support us further by pressing the hype button so this story in the video can be heard by more people.